Okay, class, this is lesson 6. It falls under rainfall and it is going to focus on evaporation and water cycle. We need to define evaporation. We look at factors affecting the rate of evaporation, and after we also look briefly at a water cycle. So what is evaporation? Evaporation refers to the process by which water changes from liquid state to gaseous state. Water changes from the liquid state to gaseous state. Then what are the factors that influence the rate of evaporation? We have temperature. We can combine temperature with sunshine. The higher the temperature, the higher the rate of evaporation, and vice versa, because when sun hits the water bodies, that's when the water bodies evaporate. Then we have vegetation cover. Areas which are covered with much or thick vegetation cover have low rate of evaporation because the vegetation limits the amount of heat from the sun or radiation that would have caused evaporation on the ground. And areas with limited vegetation cover may have high rate of evaporation because heat from the sun comes direct to the ground. Then we have water bodies. The more the water bodies in an area, the higher the rate of evaporation, because we all believe that evaporation takes place on water bodies like lakes, seas and oceans. Then we have the nature of the surface, the nature of the ground surface. We have wet grounds and dry grounds. Wet grounds produce much vapor that joins the atmosphere compared to dry grounds. This means that wet grounds or surfaces have high rate of evaporation compared to dry grounds. Humidity or atmospheric humidity. Areas with high atmospheric humidity have low evaporation rate compared to areas with low atmospheric humidity, because much humidity, much water vapor in atmosphere reduces the amount of radiation or heat that would have caused evaporation on the ground. Then water cycle. It can also be called hydrological cycle. What is water cycle? This refers to the continuous movement of water above and below the Earth's surface. Continuous movement of water above and below the Earth's surface. We all believe that when it rains, some runoffs become surface runoffs and others enter the ground to become underground runoffs. And again, we have rivers flowing on Earth's surface above the ground, and we have other runoffs in form of rivers which I hope they move under the ground. And when there is evaporation, water changes into vapor through a process of evaporation, from the lakes and the seas and oceans. It joins the atmosphere, forms clouds, clouds form rainfall, rainfall comes back to the same oceans and seas. Some falls on Earth's surface without seas and oceans. It forms surface runoffs. Some part of water enters the ground to form underground runoffs, and after this water is evaporated again, it joins the atmosphere, so it makes a cycle. So the water moves from one reservoir to another, such as from river to ocean, or from the ocean to the atmosphere, by physical processes. We have a number of processes that make up the water cycle. If you check this diagram, you will look at this diagram, and the major parts you will find: we have vegetation cover, we have lakes, you can even call them oceans or seas. These are seas or lakes or oceans, these ones. And we have the ground. This dry part is the ground. And if you check on the lakes, we have evaporation on the lakes. Evaporation on the lakes. The vapor joins the atmosphere through a process of evaporation. And if you check on vegetation, the vegetation transpires. There is transpiration on vegetation, and the vapor from vegetation also joins the atmosphere under the process of transpiration. When you combine processes of evaporation and transpiration, they form one process which we call evapotranspiration. Processes of transpiration and evaporation, when they produce the vapor and this vapor reaches the condensation level, it forms clouds. The clouds form rainfall, which falls back on the Earth's surface under the process of precipitation. But remember, we have the sun, which sends its heat under the process of radiation, which radiation causes evaporation on water bodies and transpiration on vegetation. When this rainfall reaches the ground or the Earth's surface, some of its water runs on Earth's surface. Those are surface runoffs. And some of the water enters the ground under the process of percolation or infiltration. It forms it forms ground runoffs, which also continue moving, and finally they enter lakes, seas or oceans. They again evaporate and make this complete cycle, which we have called water cycle. We have components of water cycle. These are the major elements or parts that make a water cycle to be complete. We have a process of evaporation. As we said earlier, this process changes liquid or water into gas or into vapor. Then we have transpiration. It's a process by which plants lose excess water through their leaves to the atmosphere. Then we have advection. This is the horizontal transportation of atmospheric moisture over the oceans and the continents by atmospheric saturation. Then we have condensation. This is the transformation of water vapor into solid form. We have precipitation. This is form of liquid or solid water particles that fall on the Earth's surface from the atmosphere. Then we have infiltration or percolation. It's a process through which water or rainwater enters the ground or soil to form groundwater. Thank you.